Hey boos, in this video I give commentary based on my opinion. Nothing is to be taken as factual. We are just here to have conversation. We don't expose and we don't sip tea on this channel. I'm giving you real talk straight, no chaser. Let's see if you can handle it.
Cause I'm a boss. Oh, hell no.
Hi guys, it's Yanni and I'm back with another video. In today's video, I'm going to be talking about Christianity, religion, and forgiveness. Before I get into today's video, this topic has been trending all over Twitter, okay? And there's this debate between Christianity, religion, or Christians and forgiveness, and how Christians are too forgiving in certain circumstances or situations. So I wanted to chime in on this, and I'm going to give you a little bit of a background when it comes to my religion and my beliefs and how I grew up before we really dig into this topic. First things first, when it comes to my background, I grew up in the church. I sung in the choir. I went to Bible study. Every Sunday, me and my family, we attended church. It was just the thing to do every Sunday. And my grandfather was on the deacon board. My father was on the deacon board. My grandmother was on the mother board. My mom, she was choir director. She was also a lead singer. I don't know, I've always been around family that were just super active in the church. That's pretty much my background. I got baptized when I think I was really young. I had to be maybe 8 is when I got baptized, and I still remember being baptized till this day. I remember the water. I remember the shower cap that my mom had on my head. So when it comes to forgiveness, I think forgiveness is more so for you. I think forgiveness is an act of courage. Forgiveness is an act of doing the right thing, because holding on to something that you're not benefiting from, like a grudge, all because you won't forgive, I don't think it gets you anywhere. So when it comes to Christians and forgiveness, I understand why they do it. You cannot ignore the fact that it started from a place to keep blacks oppressed, and it's like Christians want to ignore that. I get what they're saying as far as, oh, I forgive. So forgiveness in the Bible was taught to us as slaves as to forgive our oppressor, and that's why within the Bible, if you do your research in the Old Testament, they justify slavery, they justify being born into slavery, and they justify the property of women. And when you look at the country that we live in, and you look how white supremacy came about and how women were viewed as property, it didn't even matter if you were black or white. And then you look at how slavery was justified and how being born into slavery was a thing. But you have to understand forgiveness in the Bible and where it really originated from. And it originated from slaves forgiving their oppressor to keep them oppressed. The Amber Guyger situation and the whole situation that happened in the courtroom, there's just a lot of mammy-ish activity going on in that courtroom, and it wasn't the fact that he forgave her. When it came to the forgiveness aspects, I respect it. You can forgive, but the comforting her was what I had an issue with. It was almost like the people in the courtroom were acting as if an innocent black man didn't die. And that's what I had an issue with it. I get the forgiveness, and I'm a spiritual person, so I understand why it was done. But the comforting, the fixing her hair, making sure she feels comfortable, and no, I'm not here for that. I'm not. There is a theory that the family got paid, but that's a theory, that's a rumor. It's alleged that the family got paid, and that's why we saw all that meme-ish activity happen within the courtroom. And the reason why they're saying that the family was paid off was because they didn't want a whole another Trayvon Martin type situation to happen, or a riot to start, or any of that. So they played it cool within the media. I just wanted to touch on that. I didn't want to get too far deep into that. Moving on, of course, with growth in learning more about myself and learning more about like who I am and what I want to be, I have kind of ventured off away from the Christianity belief. And what do I mean by that? It's just the religion. It's not God. Okay. So I personally, and I want to say I did this about 2 years ago, I separated my relationship with God from the religion, because there were a lot of things when I started getting deep in the Bible, when I started reading the Bible, when I started learning more about the things in the Bible, there were a lot of things that I didn't agree with. As a believer within the Christianity faith, you're not supposed to question anything, because if you do, it's a sin. However, I'm a rebel. If you can ask my mother, you can ask anybody in my family, I consider myself the black sheep of my family, because I'm not afraid to question things. I'm not afraid to ask questions. I'm not afraid to get out here and do research and find and figure out things for myself. I've always been like that. I'm an Aries. That's what we do. We don't just run off what someone else says. We don't just believe just because this person is saying this, and this. And in the beginning of my Christianity belief, I believed everything. I took everything for what it was. I believed it to be true, everything. But as I grew and as I started to self-educate myself, there were things that I questioned that just did not make sense to me. With that being said, a lot of Christians would say, well, oh, you're confused. You don't know what to believe in, blah, blah, blah. I'm not confused. I'm very aware of what's going on. However, I do have a testimony. So the reason why I separated religion from God and I didn't walk away from God completely was because I have a testimony. So my testimony is this. When I was in college, freshman year, this was probably the highlight of my depression, meaning this was probably the worst part of my depression that I went through. I remember being so alone, and I remember just going through so much, and I felt like my family wasn't there for me. And I talked about this in my previous video. They dropped me off at college and they kind of just left me there knowing that I wasn't healthy. And healthy meant my depression started way before freshman year and of college. So when they just dropped me off and they left me there knowing that I wasn't healthy, I felt so alone. And that was the first time that I was away from family. That was the first time that I was like really on my own. And I felt so alone, and I was in so much pain, and I was just hurting so bad. And I just felt like, why would God do this to me? Like, I was so angry at God because I didn't understand why he was making me go through all of this, go through so much pain, and just I was so miserable. I was suicidal. Every day I would question about taking my own life. It was that bad. So on the darkest day of my depression, and I call it the darkest day, I remember the darkest day of my depression because he came to me. So let me explain what I mean by that. When God came to me on my darkest day, and people question, because when I give this testimony, I've yet to give it on YouTube, but when I give the testimony, people question like, well, how do you know it was God? When I project my voice out to you guys, I know what that sounds like. When I keep my thoughts to myself and I hear the voice in my head, I know that voice. I grew up knowing that voice. I know who I am, right? But this voice, it wasn't my voice. It wasn't the voice that I project to you, and it's not the voice that's in my head. It was God. And how did I know it was God? I just knew. If you're a spiritual person, then you know what that feels like. And I could feel him. And it was the craziest thing ever because for months I had felt so alone, and to a point where I had turned my back on God because I was so angry at him, because I was just going through so much at such a young age, and I felt like my friends and everyone that was around me were just really enjoying the college experience, and I felt like I was just left with a bunch of BS. So when he came to me, I knew it was him. And this is the thing that I respect when it comes to my parents and my family. They introduced me to him. Yes, it was through the Christianity religion, but at the end of the day, I have a relationship with him, and they introduced me to God through that religion. So at the end of the day, I love my parents for that, you know? So when he came to me, I knew it was him. And when he came to me, he said, "You are not alone." Those were his exact words. "You're not alone. You're not alone." And I remember the voice, and I remember the feeling, and I remember laying in my bed and I just started sobbing, and I was sobbing so loud. And I just remember, like, from that day forward, I never felt alone again. I always knew that God was there with me. So that is my testimony. And like I said, when people question if he's real, I know he's real because of that experience. And that's why when it came to the whole religion and Christianity, I separated the two because I knew that was what was best for me based off of the experience that I had on my darkest day. And I will never forget it. And I call it my darkest day. My darkest day of my depression was when I knew and I found God and I seek God on my own because of that experience. So I'm sure you guys are wondering, well, where do you stand with religion as of today? There's just a lot of things within the Bible that I don't agree with. And if you do your research, okay, I am only stating these things for you to take the time out of your life to do your research. I'm not in any way trying to convince you to believe differently. And with me reprogramming myself, it didn't just start with how I think and how I view Black men and Black women and the Black community. It didn't just start there and ended there. It also trickled on down into religion. Things that I don't agree with within the Bible. I don't agree with spanking a child as a form of discipline. Why? There are so many different ways that you can discipline a child. And I really didn't understand it until I became an adult, because I have to discipline myself as an adult. Till this day, I have to discipline myself when it comes to my eating, my exercising, me making sure that as a businesswoman that I'm doing this and doing that, and I'm just being super active with getting things done. That right there is a form of discipline. So when I look at a child and I see a child and I'm like, okay, beating and yelling at a child, that's easy. That's the quickest, easiest way to discipline a child. But to talk with a child, to have them acknowledge the fact that they did this wrong or they did that wrong and explain to them why they shouldn't do it, that actually takes work, but that is also a form of discipline. There are so many different ways and so many different discipline methods that you can use, but in the Bible, they choose to beat a child, and I just don't believe in that. How is it as adults, we were placed here to protect children, but when it comes to discipline, we get to beat them? What sense does that make? When I was beat as a child, I got hit with switches, extension cords, fly swatters. I got hit with sticks, anything that my parents could pick up and grab, they would hit me with that. And I just remember as a child how they would have me bend over and place my hands on the end of a chair or the end of a couch or something, and they would hit me repeatedly. And when I look back on those moments, I'm like, why in the hell did my parents ever think that that was a good idea? So now that I'm an adult and I have that experience, the only thing that beating did for me was not want to run to my parents if I needed help. And also it made me never want to ask them or go to them for advice. I was always fearful to run to my parents to ask them for this, or run to my parents to ask them for that, or run to my parents for anything. All beating did was for me personally, was fear my parents and not ask them for anything. There's so many different ways you can discipline a child, and you can instill life lessons into them when you do it. A lot of the things that I don't agree with in the Bible really comes from the Old Testament. And if you are a believer with the Christianity religion, do you know what I'm talking about? Hopefully you should know what I'm talking about if you've done your research. Before I walked away from Christianity religion and said, you know what, I'm just gonna focus on my relationship with God, I did my research. I didn't just say, oh yeah, I'm gonna let social media dictate this, I'm gonna let YouTube dictate this. No, I formed my own thoughts, my own opinions on why. And another thing was, when I left the church, the number one reason I left church was because I did not feel God's presence. The day that he came to me on my darkest day, I know what that felt like. And when I was going to church, I was no longer feeling his presence. I no longer felt like he was speaking to me through the sermons that were being preached. And I still listen to Christianity sermons to this day. If I feel compelled to turn on the TV and watch Pastor Todd on YouTube, then I will still do that. I do what I feel spiritually resonates with me through Christianity sermons or not. Like, I do what I feel moved to do. And that's how I know God speaks through me or is speaking to me, because of certain things like that. Do I go to church? No. Am I opposed to going to church? No. I will definitely go to church with my mother, my grandmother, whatever. But I know as a Christian believer, you know, they want you to be all in. And it's like, I can't be all in. I don't want to accept the bad from the Christianity religion. I don't have to. I found that I can accept all the good of the Christianity religion and not be, you know, so deep in the Christianity religion and still have my relationship with God. So why not do that? So I don't feel like I have to go through religion or Christianity religion to get to God. I'm gonna just go directly to the source. That's my thought process. And people want to say, oh, you're confused. No, my clarity is I don't have to go through religion to get to God. I can go directly to God. I don't have to worship in church to worship. I don't have to be a believer just by going to church. I just want Christians to really step outside the box for a sec and think about it. Like, you don't have to go to church to see God. You can reach out to God in so many different ways. You can connect with God in so many different ways. You can meditate, you can do yoga, you can exercise. Every time I exercise, I'm speaking to God. Every time. And people ask me, well, how are you so consistent? Because God is with me. He is telling me, keep going. He is telling me, push yourself. There's so many different ways that you can connect with God. But so many people feel the only way you can connect with God is by going to church. And that's not true. And I hope that it's not true, because if you are only connecting with God on Sundays, are you really a believer? Are you really a believer? Do you really have a relationship with God like you claim you do? These are questions that I ask myself. I still love gospel music. I love gospel music. It puts me in an upbeat, and it puts me in a very spiritual mood, and it makes me really warm, and it makes me feel good. You know, I still listen to gospel music. It's just, I don't feel like I have to go through religion to get to God. I go directly to the source. Another thing that I couldn't really get with in the Bible was Christians, some, I'm not going to say all, but they tend to look down on spiritual people like myself. I'm spiritual, but God is above all else, okay? So I'm more spiritual than religious. The crazy thing about Christians, though, some of them, not all, is that they don't understand that the same things that are in the Bible can be found outside of the Bible. And it doesn't mean that it's demonic or evil. So with that being said, like when it comes to mediums and psychics, they live in the church. When you have people in the church that speak in tongue, who do you think they are? Do you just think they're speaking in tongue just to speak in tongue? Also, when you have that person that walks up to you in church and they say things like, God told me to tell you, who do you think that is? That's a psychic. That's a psychic within the church. So another thing that's contradicting, if you do your research on the history of blacks, if you don't know about the black Jews and the black Israelites, please do your research. I'm not about to get into all of that. I really advise that you do your research. Christianity was not our original religion. It was taught to us. They didn't teach us how to read, but they did teach us about the religion. Why did they do that? Why did they not teach us how to read and write, but they taught us what the Bible said? It doesn't make sense. Also, the practice of witchcraft and magic is in the Bible. And there's so many scriptures on that. When Peter walked on water, when Moses parted the Red Sea, when Jesus turned water into wine, all of those were symbolic of witchcraft and magic. But our ancestors, they practiced black magic, and it was labeled black magic and it was labeled demonic because of white supremacy. Again, I'm not trying to test your faith. Believe what you want to believe, but do your research, okay? I'm really hoping to spark A, conversation, B, for you to actually get into it and do some research and figure out things for yourself, and just for you to be educated, okay? Because this type of stuff is not being really talked about. Of course, they labeled what we used to practice black magic and they labeled it demonic and evil, because if we would have used those resources during slavery, where would that have placed us? Where would that have put white supremacy? These are questions that I asked myself when I was doing my research. Also, when people say, oh, you're such a spiritual person, sometimes Christians like to look down on you for being spiritual, but at the same time, it's like, don't you believe in the Holy Ghost? Don't you believe in the Holy Spirit? When Christians, some of them say things like, oh, you're spiritual, or they look down on people that are spiritual, and it's like, but you're spiritual too. You believe in the Holy Ghost, you believe in the Holy Spirit. I believe in the same spirit that you believe in. It's just, I don't put a label on it. Another thing that I wanted to talk about was another reason that I really walked away from the faith was because I didn't believe in spanking. I didn't like how the Bible justified slavery. It also talked about being born into slavery, and it also talked about the property of women. It can all be found in the Old Testament, you guys. And so when you look at this country and you look how it was built, and it was built off lies. If you look up the history of Central Park, New York City, that was a black community that was burned to the ground because it was too close to Manhattan. How do I know that? Research. Another thing, Christopher Columbus. How in history books it was taught to us that he was a pioneer and he did all of these great things, but he was a murderer. He killed people to be the pioneer that he was. But that's not what's in those books. Those history books that they teach us, they're filled with lies. So you want me to believe the Bible, you want me to believe page by page. I'm not saying that the Bible is filled with all of its lies. I'm not saying that. But I definitely feel like some passages out of that Bible, I don't believe it all. I don't believe every passage. I don't. Out of the Bible, what I like to do, I take what resonates with me and I use that for my own personal gain. Anything that doesn't, like justifying slavery, being born into slavery, and the property of women, everything that I'm against, I'm not for that. Personally, when I realized that I didn't have to go through religion to get to God, and I was like, oh, you know what? I can go directly to the source because I have a personal relationship with God. I was at peace. I was at peace knowing that my ancestors did not practice that religion. And I was at peace knowing that I didn't have to accept the bad from the Christianity religion. That I could still have my relationship with God and I could still be a spiritual person and I could still have faith and believe. And I could still remember the day that God came to me on my darkest day and he told me that I wasn't alone. I was at peace. I'm not confused. I'm very woke out here. God is very active in my life. I pray, I worship, I listen to gospel music sometimes on a Tuesday. Y'all have seen me, and that is just how I live my life. I don't feel like I need the Christianity religion to be closer to God. I felt like me walking away from church because I knew he wasn't there and I knew I couldn't feel him. And that was the weirdest thing for me, like going to church but not feeling him, going to church and not feeling a connection with him. That's what made me walk away from church. It wasn't social media. It wasn't being woke and being black and being all this. Like, it was the fact that as a spiritual person, because that's what I am, I couldn't feel him there. And I knew that that's where I wasn't supposed to be. If God told me to go back to church and go back to the Christianity faith, I would do it, but he hasn't told me to do that. That's what being spiritual means. Like, that's what being spiritual looks like. You do what you're told. Me coming to LA, I was told to come to LA, or me getting fired from my job and not looking for another job. That's what God told me to do. Me focusing on YouTube right now and slowing down with all these other business opportunities that are coming my way, God told me to do that. And when you know you're doing what you're supposed to be doing, when things just fall into place and you don't have to worry about, well, when is this going to happen? When is that going to happen? Or is this going to work out? Is this what I'm supposed to do? It just happens. That's how you know you are being obedient. He will place people in your life. He will place things in your life, and you have to pay attention. You have to be spiritually in tune in order for you to have this type of faith. That's all that I have regarding this video, you guys. And let me know if you want to talk more about this type of stuff on my YouTube. I'm actually very scared to post this video because there's so many judgmental people out here and they have their own opinions and their own beliefs. And you know, I respect it. I think that as long as you believe in God, you will go far in life and you will lead a successful life and you will lead a life of happiness. So I really don't care about all this other in-between stuff. I view religion as a political ploy. It's no different than the Democratic Party, the Republican Party, being a liberal. It don't matter. Like, you don't have to be tied to a party for you to know the difference between right and wrong and the good. I don't feed into all of that. I am just more of a spiritual person. I know who God is. I know he's real, and that's all that matters to me. So that's all that I have regarding this video, you guys. Comment down below your thoughts and opinions on this topic, and I'll catch you in my next one.